Okay, now that you have your armature ready, let's see how to apply clay. Okay, the armature that I created is finished. I've exaggerated his legs. I decided to make really long legs. It's a sitting figure with long legs and relatively long arms. I have tissue paper, which is nice and squishy around his feet, toilet paper around his calf muscles, and I've used a paper towel for his main body and more tissue paper up here. The important thing is that whatever you've wrapped has a lot of give. Okay, now I chose to do this sculpture because I want to demonstrate if you're doing something that you want to have symmetry. So our left and right body is the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my clay. I have a bowl of water to keep my hands moist. I poured a little bit of vinegar into a recycle tin. Remember, you can use any vinegar, it doesn't matter. Vinegar is vinegar. Okay, let me get my clay. Get all the air out of my bag. Quickly seal it. And get it out of the way. Okay, so this is leftover clay from my last project that I had, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little moisture. So I'm going to dip my fingers in the water, put it on the palm of my hand, and rub so that you're just glassy. They're not wet. And I'm going to start just flattening this piece out. I'm going to start from the feet up, because if you start top down, what can happen is it'll be too top heavy and topple over. It's a lot easier to work from the bottom up. Okay, so I'm just making a circle, making the clay really nice and thin, and I'm going to work on both feet at the same time. So I'm just flattening it out using the palm of my hand. And you want to go for not quite 1/4 of an inch, something that is a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch. So you're making like a pancake. We don't need big thick clay. Really nice and thin is fine, but you got to be careful of paper thin, because then what will happen is it might crack a little bit. Okay, so I've made a circle because what I want to do is wrap around the legs. And I've raided my kitchen for different supplies. Here's a knife that I don't really use anymore, so I'm going to use that to cut my clay in half. You want to, when you're working symmetrically, you work on the left and the right hand side at the same time. So now I have the same pieces, same amount of clay for each foot, so that'll ensure that they're going to be symmetrical. The bottom of your sculpture needs to have a hole. That's so that air can get inside while it's being fired, so all the ash and the smoke and the paper burning can get out. I can't fire your piece if you don't have escape holes. So I'm just taking a screwdriver and wedge through a hole. Now the rough edge, I'm going to just put that to the inside because I don't have to worry about that looking pretty. And the outside is relatively smooth. So I'm going to do that to both pieces. Remember, you work whatever you do on one piece, you immediately do on the other piece, so that you are sure to, so that you can ensure symmetry. And I'm just smoothing that inside piece out. So the inside does not matter; it's not going to show anyway, and the outside is relatively smooth. You want to get rid of all those sharp edges because you, just like always, you don't want to have sharp edges. Okay, so I've got both feet pieces ready to go. I'm going to bring my little guy back. And I'm going to give him some feet. Okay, so I'm just molding the clay around my armature. And you decide, is it going to be perfectly smooth, or do you want to keep it looking really rough? It's your choice. You're the artist. Okay, I don't want to have rough. I want to have it relatively smooth, and I think I'm going to create toes. So I'm just wrapping this side around. Now, before I go too much further on that piece, to do exactly the same thing on the other piece, because I want to remember what I did. So I'm going on the other foot and just tucking in a little bit of that paper and smoothing it over. So now I'm going to put my sculpture down. I'm going to have the feet sitting up together. And I'm going to almost together with both hands, just kind of form the feet so they're looking exactly the same. This guy's going to have some big feet. Okay, you can see the holes at the bottom. That's going to help all of that interior ash to come out. Okay, all right. I'm not going to bore you with me stylizing my feet here. So what I'm going to do is pause the video for a little bit and create up the leg. Okay, I found that while I was working on the feet, it was a little bit difficult, so I made like a big stool for my guy. I found some kitchen containers that I could stack up to make him a big stool. But if you'll notice, this one I put into a bag because I don't want to get clay on my mom's food or your mom's food or anybody's food products. So you want to be sure that you protect whatever you're using around clay and we're not getting it dirty. So as I'm forming the feet, I've made another flat piece, and I'm just going to take little pieces and slowly work my way up the leg. I'm going to stylize the feet a little bit more later, but I'm just going to keep going up the leg with little pieces and just smearing it into, as long as my clay is not dried out, I'm just going to be smearing it into the pieces below. You don't need the vinegar. You need the vinegar for things later, but you don't need the vinegar. So I'm just going to keep on going up the leg, building the calf muscle, and I'll be right back. Okay, while I'm working on the feet, I want to ensure that my clay up here doesn't get dried out too fast. So I'm going to take a piece of torn paper towel, dip it in the water, squeeze out all of the water, really all of it. Squeeze all the water out, and just like we learned at class, just fling that paper towel around until it comes undone. And I'm going to wrap it around his little ankle so that that clay will stay moist and be able to blend into what I'm adding. Because right now I'm going to work on sculpting his feet. Okay, just putting that around there to keep some water in there. To sculpt his feet, I've used a stir stick, or you can use a screwdriver, whatever you want. And I've cut where his little toes go, and I've just kind of used the stir stick to round out where his toes are. You can see that they're still a little bit rough. I'm using the back of a wooden spoon, and I'm going to push that in to create little toenails. So you're going to have to get creative with what you can find in your house as far as being able to add details to your sculpture. So I'm going to finish sculpting the feet a little bit, and then I'm going to move up. Okay, now that I've sculpted his feet, they're a little Fred Flintstone looking, but I want it to have a handmade look. I don't want it to look like a machine made it. I'm going to get my clay out again. Again, close it airtight, and I'm going to unwrap the moist paper towel so that I can continue to build up the thigh. So if you are sculpting, you want to sculpt while the clay is still soft, and then continue on afterwards. Okay, now that I've pulled that off, I can see it needs a little bit more, but they're fairly symmetrical, I mean, as far as clay feet go. And I'm going to just continue to pinch off a little bit of clay. Oh, I'm going to add a little bit more moisture. I've got my water bottle here. And I'm going to add moisture to my hand. I'm just going to lightly, remember it's only glossy, I'm going to lightly tap where I was, put some on my clay because it's feeling a little dry. And I'm just going to start building up the leg. Okay, so I want my guy to have some thin ankles, and he's going to have thicker calves. So I'm going to try to keep the same thickness as I go up. You have to be very careful not to compress your paper underneath. It's okay if the paper gets a little bit into the clay. So I'm going super thin, and I'm just going around and compressing, blending it in, and going up. So it's going to go up the leg, smoothing it out along the way. I'm going to go a little bit on this leg, and then I'm going to switch to the other leg. So I'm going to go just a little bit up this leg and switch to the other leg. Okay, and I'm going to just keep going all the way up until I get to the knees and the body. Okay, so I've taken the clay up his legs, and I'm just going to pull it back a little bit so we can see how it's going. And I'm going to show you once again how to add the clay. So I'm just flattening it with my fingers. I'm not making it perfect. Just flattening it with my fingers and going the width of his leg out lengthwise. Then at the very end, I'm just really pinching it, making it super thin for the overlap. Again, I just put my hands in some water. I'm gonna get my hands relatively wet, shiny. I'm gonna pat the outside because it's lost some moisture to the paper. Pat the outside of this piece, just getting a little bit in. And now I am going to wrap it around his little leg and blend it in. Okay, so his leg is very lumpy and bumpy and out of shape, and what I want to have is a thin ankle coming up to a calf and then coming back in just before it hits the knee. And it is very lumpy. So here's where the vinegar comes into play. So I'm going to get just a little bit more clay. And you guys, you cannot make something as big as this. This is using up a lot of clay. You're going to be making a really small little sculpture. I made a bigger one just for demonstration so you can see. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of clay, just a little. I'm going to put the rest back in my bag and seal it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch some that's really thin, and I'm going to be using vinegar. And I can use the points of a knife, or I can use a fork, or I can use a toothpick, something to score, because now I'm going to start adding bits to the outside. Over here, he's got a big chunk out of his leg, so I put a little vinegar on, and I'm scoring it up, and then put a little vinegar on here, and score this up. Now, the reason you are going to want to score on these pieces is because the clay is starting to dry. So I just added a little bit there, and it looks like I'm going to have to add more. It's still big cave-in his leg. So I'm going to just keep on adding little bits and pieces. Vinegar, scoring, vinegar, and building up areas so that his calf muscle is going to be more uniform, not so lumpy, and it will and then I'll build in a tiny little bit of muscle definition. So what I want is a thin ankle coming up to a thicker a thicker calf coming back in at the knees. So in other words, what you're going to do is like the feet, I constructed the feet, and then I went back and I molded it. Now the one leg I'm not working on, I'm going to take a damp paper towel again, I'm putting it in water, squeezing all of it out, and I'm going to wrap this around the section that I still need to join while I'm working on this section. Now let's just say I'm totally finished. Now this is really a big one, and this one is a little bit tricky, but it's the same as what we do in class. We're going to have to wrap it. So what I would do is I would take my little guy. Now he's a big guy. You're going to have a little guy. Take my little guy, wrap him in moist paper towel. Moist, okay? So you're going to take and kind of mummify him a little bit. It's a little bit different than how we did in the class. So you're going to wrap moist paper towel around everywhere that you've worked. And then you are going to put a paper bag over the top and seal it to your workspace. Now, if you can't work here anymore, because I'm in the middle of my kitchen, I can't cook. If I can't work here anymore, then what I'm going to have to do is put the moist paper towel, put it into a plastic bag, and then put it someplace and work on it again later. But the whole idea is to keep moisture in your clay